Hello there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero show with me, your host Simon Conboy. Today is the 17th of March. This is going to be the first in what's going to be a weekly series of review shows. These are going to be a bit longer than most of the other videos. I just kind of recap the goings on of the NFL this week. As you know, if you've been following my videos, I've done a free agency recap for every team in the NFL. They'll all be up before this video, so check those out if you want to get the thoughts and opinions of myself on those signings. This episode will cover the signings that have been made since those initial videos were published, as well as keeping up with the free agency theme. Of course, that's the story at this time of year. Going to move on to draft stuff next week. We're going to cover what teams I think have been effective in free agency, teams I like, teams I've disliked what they've done. Of course, there's still time for that to change, but that's how I will be viewing the teams at this point in time. Some of the top players that are still available, where I think they could wind up, as well as a pair of top 10 lists to top things off. I know people like top 10 lists. They'll be covering my favourite moves thus far, as well as the moves I dislike. So, on with the show. Got a lot to get through today. First up, going to go to the Vikes. They didn't make too many signings early on, as I mentioned in that first video. Re-signed Adam Thielen, the wide receiver, to a 3-year $17 million deal. I like this move. Played quite well towards the end of last season. Still a young player. Seems to have developed a rapport with Sam Bradford. Similar kind of possession receiver to Stephon Diggs, but gives them another option. Still feel like they need a real deep threat, big-bodied option. They wanted Alshon Jeffrey, they couldn't get him, but this gives them, another solid option. Good move all round. Perfectly fine with the contract there. I think this is a good manoeuvre. They also have signed Latavius Murray. Big need at running back, of course. Adrian Peterson no longer with the team. He's on a 3-year, $15 million deal. From what I've managed to find on the internet, apparently it's essentially a 1-year $8 million deal due to sort of clauses. He's an okay running back. Thought he underperformed last year, was on a very good offense with a very good offensive line, was mediocre, I would say. Not particularly elusive. He's got speed, but not a particularly elusive player. Doesn't break too many tackles. Has got a little bit of sort of power to him, but not great at the point of contact, to be honest. But he'll be the starter for them, so it's a reasonable manoeuvre. I think they still need to try and get someone else in, but they absolutely had to make some kind of move. They couldn't go in to the season with Matt Asiata as their starting running back. So, pretty reasonable there. They've brought in Terrence Newman. Well, brought back Terrence Newman, who continuing to play at a reasonable level considering his age, kind of like James Harrison of defensive backs at this point. He just keeps on trucking. I didn't think they would bring him back. Of course, there was an altercation with Zimmer in the middle of the season. It was more toward the end. One of the games didn't particularly like the game plan. Apparently was changing things up on the field. Well, they brought him back anyway. Good player to have in the locker room. He knows what he's doing. Must be great to have players like that in meeting rooms. Even if he can't perform at a particularly high level, he'll help them there. And it's also only a 1-year pact. They've also brought in Dayton Jones, former first-round pick of the Green Bay Packers. Never really performed up to his draft status there. Hasn't really shown too much at this point in his career. It's a 1-year deal, $3.7 million. I think the contract's a bit high. That probably comes with the pedigree, but it is only a 1-year deal. He'll provide some depth on what's already a pretty stout front, so it'll be interesting to see, first off, how many snaps he gets and what he can offer them when he does get onto the field. As I say, I think the price was a little high for my liking. We had a trade. This was Jeremy Zutar being traded from the Baltimore Ravens to the 49ers. Just a move down for San Fran in the 6th round. Guessing it's a salary dump for the Ravens. He's been an effective player, had some injuries, but can play at guard. Is pretty good at the centre spot. Good move for the Niners. As I've said previously, one of the worst rosters in the league. 31 at this point, not really a long-term solution, but he'll help them next season. Can play a lot of spots, good player to have. So that's a solid move. As I say, I can only assume the Ravens just wanted to clear that cap room. So benefits both teams, good deal all round. Sticking with the Niners, got the details on the Malcolm Smith deal. 5 years, $26 million and 13 million guarantees. I'll speak more on this one later. Pretty ridiculous signing in my opinion. We've got sticking with the Ravens, who I just mentioned there. They've bought in Brandon Carr, formerly of the Cowboys, on a 2-year, $12 million deal. It's a veteran corner. He'll play across from Jimmy Smith. How much he's got left in the tank, I'm not sure. I think it's a bit more expensive than I'd like, but it's a pretty solid move. Won't critique the Ravens too much for it. They did need to bring in somebody else. It would be nice to see them get a bit younger at that position. But did I say Jimmy Williams? Jimmy Smith, who's a fine corner, by the way. So, okay move there. Again, not too... The length is fine. Would have maybe preferred a bit less because, as I say, it's a pretty good market, and apparently there's some good guys in the draft available. Moving on to the tight end spot. Had Lance Kendricks go to the Packers. This is a perfectly reasonable deal. 2 years, $4 million. Of course, he'll be the backup, playing behind Martellus Bennett. Packers do not play from 2 receiver sets particularly often. Don't see that changing. Kendricks has been wildly inconsistent in his career. Had one season, I think it was 2 years ago, it was pretty effective for the Rams, but not particularly good hands, can disappear at times. I mean, it's hard to evaluate, an individual player on that Rams offense last year because it was such a disaster zone. May not see the field too much, but it's a reasonable contract. Gives them some depth for players who's, played in the league. They can probably slot him in if something unfortunate does happen with Martellus Bennett. Solid move, can't complain about that one. Then we've got, going on with my theme of tight ends getting overpaid, Jared Cook has left the Packers. He is now going to be a Raider. This is a 2-year, $12 million deal. Another one of these overpays at tight end. When he's on, he's dangerous. He's a very athletic receiving tight end, but his hands are inconsistent, can disappear for large stretches of games. Wouldn't trust him too much. I get there's a need there, but I thought, Michael Rivera was okay for them in the last couple of years. I think there are better options available. I don't like the amount of money they're throwing at him. I don't know what kind of effort they'll get. He's poor in his time in Tennessee. You saw that in Spates last year with Green Bay. Not a big fan of this move, even though it was a need for the Raiders. I believe I've got one more running back. Darren McFadden, he's re-signed with the Cowboys. This is a solid move. Don't have the contract info yet. I'd expect it to be, a kind of 2 or 3 year deal, maybe $4 million a year. If it's in that kind of range, I think it's okay. Knows the system, good backup, experienced player. Of course, Ezekiel Elliott's going to handle the vast majority of the workload there. But, this gives them a reliable backup if something unfortunate does occur. Good move. I'll revisit it if I think the contract information, the contract's horrible. But at this point, solid move. Makes a lot of sense for both parties. Dontari Poe, he's finally signed, probably the biggest name on this list and definitely the biggest man on this list. He's on a 1-year, $8 million prove-it deal with the Falcons. I think this is a really, really good move. Keeps the player motivated. Clearly a market didn't develop for him for the long-term deal with big money that he was seeking. So should be motivated going into next year. When he's at his best, he's possibly the best nose tackle in the league. Can offer some pass rush from that spot. Of course, that's not easy to find and can be a very, very effective run player when he wants to be. Good move for the Falcons. They needed to add some beef to that defensive line. Should help them. They were very poor against teams running at them at points last year. This should help shore that up. Whether, if he plays really well, whether they'll be able to retain him next year, I'm not so sure. But for the short term, this certainly improves that team. It means they can kick Grady Jarrett out to defensive end as well in that scheme. It's looks like a really good move to me. Hard to critique this one too much. Very similar to the Benny Logan deal, who is going to be replacing Poe in Kansas City as well. So that'll be interesting to compare those two players, see how they both perform next year. One move that I actually did not mention during the recaps, and I'm just going to revisit that here, is Brandon Albert, of course, was part of the Julius Thomas trade with the Dolphins. Great move for the Dolphins simply because they were going to cut him anyway. They managed to get Julius Thomas out of it, which will help them. I like that move quite a lot. I don't know if they're going to revamp the deal because, of course, Albert is on a pretty big contract. If he's healthy, he's a very good player. He'll help the Jags a lot. It was a big need. I understood this deal from both sides. Jags have the cap room, I suppose. They've got a lot of highly paid players. If you can stay healthy, this is a really good move. It's one of them trades that really was easy to understand why both parties involved went through with it. So, solid move. Good job there, Jags. Even if I have been critical of you for a lot of the moves thus far. So, any that I missed, let me know. I'll try and get to them in future episodes. In terms of the guys that are still out there, we'll just go through some of the big names. I've just sort of gone through the top 100 list, made a note of some of them. Still got Adrian Peterson and Jamal Charles in terms of big name running backs. Peterson, I don't know what the market for him is. I don't know how highly he sort of values himself. I think that could be a big stumbling block at this point. There's also word that the Raiders want to try and get Marshawn Lynch to come out of retirement. Not gonna lie, kind of hope that happens. This guy's a lot of fun to watch run. Could be very, very effective there. The Raiders, I could see why they'd want to bring in a big time running back. Would really help take that offense to another level. Jamal Charles, I think he's a more intriguing and probably pleasant option for the teams. Looking at a running back, of course, fits what a lot more teams do. Offers you a lot in the pass game, one of the best receiving backs in the league. Unsure how he's going to be, coming off 2 major knee injuries over the last 2 seasons. But if he's healthy, he could be a real value signing for someone. He'll definitely be picked up. As I say, I'm not sure what's going to go on with Peterson, but Jamal Charles certainly a nice option for teams out there looking for a guy to contribute from the backfield next season. I hope he doesn't fall off. He's been a lot of fun to watch. I think he could fit well with so many teams that need running back help. Difficult to give one name for him. Peterson, the Raiders were thrown around. I don't think the interest is there anymore. Of course, Eddie Lacy's now in Seattle, so that's not going to happen. I don't think, the Buccaneers were a name that's thrown around. I don't think they're going to be interested in him. The Giants, I don't think they will either. No idea what's going to happen there. I don't think he'll be playing next year, in all honesty. Which may be a shock to a lot of people, but that's just how I see that developing. On top of that, we still got Colin Kaepernick out there, as I mentioned previously. I'm not sure a team is going to touch him. As I say, could definitely play, but I think the issue teams will have is with all the protest stuff, which, as I say, I don't personally consider that a problem. The issue I think there is that, that maybe puts into question where his focus is in terms of playing football and being the best quarterback he can be. Of course, play fell off since the Harbaugh era, so I don't know if a team's going to want to go near him. Of course, he brings that controversy with him as well. That I think is a big issue for a lot of teams. We've also got Jay Cutler still out there. I agree with a lot of the rumours. I really think the Jets seem like the logical landing spot for him. I still think he's better than a lot of options that a lot of teams have. I think he could fit pretty well in Houston if that's a direction they wanted to go. I think that would be a really good signing for them. I think DeAndre Hopkins and him would instantly be a pretty good tandem. I don't know if he's good enough to make a Super Bowl, but I think it's a more reliable option in some ways than Romo. Although I think, honestly, if Cutler's there, he probably does make the Texans the favourite in the AFC South simply because the roster is very, very good there. People do forget that he has had some success in his career. He did get the Bears to an NFC Championship game years ago. And there's more than most guys out there. Of course, we've still got Geno Smith out there. I can't see a team signing him to be a starter. I think he'll find a spot somewhere as a backup, however. Ryan Fitzpatrick, similar. I expect that to be one of the sort of later ones if somebody gets injured during training camp or pre-season. I can see him being brought in as an option. He has that weird sort of trait in his career where he's very effective in his first year with a team and then it all goes to pot after that. So that's an interesting one. Who else have we got here? Morris Claiborne, apparently he's going to be going to the Jets. A lot of news out there stating that that's a done deal. It'll be interesting to revisit that one. If the contract's good, then I'll be a big fan of that move. One of the better corners there, even if he's been pretty much unable to stay healthy in his whole career. But there's a big need at corner there. The fit certainly makes sense. TJ McDonald, he's still out there. Not particularly good in coverage, but he's a thumper. I think he'll find a spot somewhere. Maybe the contracts haven't been to his liking. I think teams perhaps know he's not great in coverage, but I think certainly effective in his role within the Rams defense. I wouldn't be shocked to see him return there. But I think it may be a case of the market hasn't proved as fruitful as he was expecting, but he's certainly a player that will be picked up by somebody. We've got Michael Floyd, as mentioned earlier, with his altercation. I don't see a team going near him. Brandon Flowers, he's still out there, solid veteran corner. It's declined a bit in the last few years. Wouldn't expect a team to pay him a particularly large amount of money. Jared Odrick, bit of a bust in his time in Jacksonville. He'll be picked up at some point. I've got no doubt about that. Bradley McDougald, average safety for the Bucs the last couple of years. Again, I think somebody will bring him in. We've got Dwight Freeney, veteran pass rusher. Been bouncing around the league, still been effective. Again, this is one of those, I think he could provide a team with good value, could potentially fall off, but expect a 1 year, sort of $1 or $2 million deal for him. That could work out for a team, that's for sure. I probably would not mind him if I'm one of those 3-4 teams. He's shown that he can fit into that kind of a system. So that's the guys that we've got out there. So moving on to the winners, and I suppose most things are called winners and losers. I don't particularly like that terminology. Just going to go with teams that I think have performed well in free agency thus far. The Colts, for simply changing the sort of strategy that they've had in the last few years, bringing in players that fit needs, not overpaying them, not bringing in older guys. I think they appear to have a better understanding of where this franchise currently is than they have in previous years, where they've been attempting to sort of get over a hump that really is a much bigger hump than they thought, because this roster doesn't have much talent on it. A lot of those declining players like Trent Cole are gone. He's still out there. I don't know what he's got left. So that should be interesting to see. So they're in here for very different reasons. Some of the other teams, I don't know how much better they are in terms of whether it's going to push them back into the playoffs, but the roster looks a little bit more solid and could look, if they have a very good draft, like it could compete in what's a pretty unpredictable going into next season AFC South. We've got the Browns. I simply just love what they've done with that offensive line. Talked a bit about this in the video on them and also sort of on the Titans. I think if you're in a rebuild mode, a really good way to do so on offense is to get a very solid offensive line in place first. Now, we've seen that with the Cowboys. They had 2 rookies last year. It's worked really, really well for them. Everything is so much easier if you've got an offensive line that can play. We've seen some, talented teams with good skill position players and solid quarterbacks struggling if the blocking is substandard. They've set that up. That on paper, it's a great line. Don't know who they're necessarily going to bring in, but whoever it is, they should be able to be productive to a level behind that line, particularly if they can get a good running back. And how they go about that, I'm not sure. So many picks. They're going to be very interesting to see how they maneuver in the next couple of years. Of course, so many draft picks. Who knows what kind of trades they could offer to teams based on what players are available. Certainly going to be interesting to follow. But yeah, really big fan of those moves. I don't know how much better they are elsewhere. Certainly expect to see more moves from them over the next few weeks. Really like what the Titans have done. Just simply attacking those needs in the backfield. Still think they could have, maybe made a push for a receiver. I know they were talked about in talking with the Saints with regards to Brandon Cooks. Nothing really came of that. I think they need to try and get one of them big body type guys, a sort of real number one target for Mariota. If they can get that, it's been great. But I really like the Cyprian and Logan Ryan signings. A couple of guys brought in for the defensive line. I don't know whether they'll make a huge difference, but they make the group a little bit more effective. The Buccaneers, my beloved Bucks, attack some needs simply. As I say, this roster had a lot of them, but they've attacked them with, players that will come in and start and improve the standard play. Chris Baker, great deal. Sean Jackson gives them an element they've not had, and they definitely need another wide receiver. Bringing in JJ Wilcox to play on the back end, re-signing some of the guys that, none of them, outside of maybe Golston, who's certainly been overpaid, the rest of them, are good contributors on reasonable deals. Jacquizz Rodgers, Chris Conte. Whilst I don't want to see Chris Conte starting for the Bucks, he's a perfectly serviceable backup. He's experienced. Just, if only he was more athletic, I think he could be a very, very good player. So I think the Bucks have done well. The Lions, similarly to the Browns, just because of the reinforcement of that offensive line will simply make that offense better. Would be nice to see them get a running back. I'm sure that's going to happen at some point. Clearly can't go into the season relying on Amir Abdullah, and Zenner is just a guy. But I think, that team is better than it was. The Eagles, great job attacking needs there. The receiving group now actually looks pretty good. With the trio of Matthews, Torrey Smith and Alshon Jeffrey. I like the deals they got done there, so I'm a fan of those moves. There's still some issues with that roster, I think, but certainly taken some positive steps, turned a real weakness into what should be a strength. Never criticise the team for that. And just as an aside, I'm not sure they've necessarily done a great job, but I've got to give credit to the Dolphins for both trades that they've been involved in. I think they were both very good moves. They were William Hayes, Julius Thomas trades. They're pretty good. Not a huge fan of the signings they've necessarily made, other than the re-signing of Jones, because he's a heck of a player, and also Cameron Wake. But, those are a pair of good moves. I like them a lot. Regarding the Colts, actually, I don't really like the Dwayne Allen trade, though. I think he's got a lot of upside, even if he has been injured. Not sure they should have made that move. In terms of the losers, I'm going to bring up the Vikings and Jags. I don't necessarily consider them, not losers, as I say. I don't like teams that I'm not sure I like what they're doing or I don't like. In this case, I'm not sure I like what they're doing. I get what the Jags are doing, spending a lot of money. Not sure they needed to. That's the issue I've got with these moves. As I say, Bouye, unproven really. Very small sort of amount of film that you can base, that kind of a contract on. The Calais Campbell move was very expensive, and he's getting older. I'm not sure he addresses one of the bigger needs, because they've got Jackson there. It definitely does address need, but I think that's an overpay as well. I'm not sure if they've got an enormous amount better. They're better, but considering the money that's been forked out, I'm not sure it's going to have the impact they wanted. As I mentioned before, they had Amu Kamara on the roster last year. I think they maybe, rather than getting Bouye, could have made an effort to retain him on a far more affordable deal. The Vikings simply, swung and missed with regards to Jeffrey. I think that would have been a big need. I think their offensive line, they've overpaid a couple of guys who are average at best. I think that's unfortunate for them. I don't know if they've got better, is the issue. I like the Phelan signing, but Latavius Murray just feels like a stopgap, whilst they at least needed a stopgap. Not a huge fan of that. They could be more active again. Not that they're firmly in the don't like column. I think this team needed to do more, because I still think you get the impression they're being quite aggressive in terms of trying to make the playoffs. I'm not sure that any of the moves they've made there will really help them in that facet. They really could have done with going out and getting one of those guards as well. In terms of teams I definitely don't like, the Bengals, I think it's been a bit of a disaster for them. The offensive line, historically a strength in the last 10 years or so. That's got significantly worse, losing both Whitworth and Zietler. We'll see that continue to have an impact on their offense going into next year. They've lost a lot of talent the last 2 years. Feel bad for the Bengals fans. This team was really talented a couple of years ago. Now they look like they've come back to the sort of middle of the pack there. The Skins, no idea what's going on in DC. Franchise looks like it's in disarray to me. Like the Terrell Pryor signing. Don't like many of the others that they've made. Losing those 2 receivers, losing Chris Baker, that's quite a lot of talent seeing walk out the door. And of course losing your GM at the time they did. Kirk Cousins, no one seems to be sure what's going on there. Can't be happy with that. The Jets, they need to I think they're in rebuild mode. That's why they've been somewhat quiet. But I think they need to be a bit more active. This roster looks really bad at this point in time. Whether they are just, setting up to fail next season and maybe get one of the quarterbacks at the top of next year's draft, which is apparently quite a promising group. I'm not sure, but they haven't attacked free agency nearly aggressively enough. Still got major needs across the offensive line. Obviously, quarterback's a problem. Don't have many weapons, and the defense outside of that front three looks pretty poor at most levels. They're going to be poor next year. You have to think